The chandelier above the lobby of the Harlow Grand has been lit every night for 6 years. $127,000, hand-blown glass from a craftsman in Murano, Italy. The man who chose it had never once spent a night inside this building. Tonight, he tried. He came through the revolving doors at 11:47 p.m. Worn leather jacket, no reservation, nothing about him that told you who he was. Beside him, a young Black woman with a 7-year-old asleep against her shoulder. A child-stuffed giraffe dangled from one small hand. They asked for a room. The clerk at the front desk looked them once, said there was nothing available. 4 minutes later, that same clerk handed key cards to 2 men who walked in off the street with no reservation at all. Before this night was over, everything in that lobby, the chandelier, the marble, the uniforms, every contract in the building, was going to mean something very different to everyone still standing in it. If you've ever walked into a room and felt someone decide what you were before you said a single word,
Welcome
this
to the
one's for
Harlow
you.
Grand. Here are your
Stay with
keys,
us.
gentlemen.
Before
Enjoy
we
your
get into the
stay.
story,
Thanks.
drop a
Thank you very
comment right
much.
now.
Thanks.
Tell us your city and what time it is where you are. We have people joining from all over the world, and we genuinely love knowing who's here. If you're new to the channel, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We tell stories like this one every week, and you don't want to miss what's coming. Now, Alec, the story starts here. Kwon Sung-jin worked the overnight cleaning shift at 417 North Wells Street for 13 years. He arrived every weeknight at 11:30 p.m. with a key card, a mop bucket, and a thermos of barley tea his wife packed before she went to bed. He cleaned 8 floors. He emptied trash bins belonging to people who would never learn his name. Alec. He polished the marble in the elevator lobby until it reflected the overhead fluorescence like still water, and then he walked to the bus stop before sunrise so his son wouldn't see him leave. Min-jae saw anyway. He was 6 years old the first time he pretended to be asleep, then crept to the window and watched his father disappear down the street in the dark. The thermos, the keycard on the lanyard, the particular set of his father's shoulders, already carrying something before the city had even woken up. 417 North Wells Street was demolished in the spring of 2011. The building came down in 4 weeks. The lot sat empty for 3 years. Min-jae Kwon purchased it in February 2014 for $8.3 million. A number that made his attorney pause mid-sentence and his accountant call twice to confirm. He built the Harlow Grand on that ground. 42 floors, 387 rooms, a chandelier in the lobby that cost $127,000 and took 4 months to install correctly, made by a 71-year-old craftsman on the island of Murano whom Min-jae had flown to meet in person because some decisions you do not hand to someone else. He had never told anyone why he chose this particular piece of land. Not his attorneys, not David Park, not Naomi Wells, who knew more about his finances than anyone alive and who had never once pressed him for an explanation he didn't offer. He had simply signed the papers, broken ground, and said nothing. His father had died 14 months before the Harlow Grand opened its doors. Alec. Min-jae had flown back to Incheon for 9 days, returned without explanation, and finished the building. There were things about Min-jae Kwon that people who worked closely with him understood without being told. He had left Incheon at 19 with $3,217 in cash and a duffel bag containing everything he considered worth keeping. His family there had certain associations, the kind discussed in careful, abbreviated language by people who understood the value of precision over detail. Min-jae had never confirmed or denied anything about that. What he had done instead was build something that required no defense. Alec, a Korean restaurant in Wicker Park with 18 seats and a lunch menu that sold out by 12:47 p.m. every single day. Then a second location, then a building, then a hospitality group with 14 properties across 7 cities. A corporate structure maintained by 3 separate law firms. Reputation that moved through rooms before he entered them. though he had worked deliberately to ensure almost no one could describe exactly why. He visited his properties unannounced and dressed plainly. Always had. It was the only honest way to see what lived inside his buildings when no one was performing for the person who signed their contracts. His father had told him once, not as advice, just as a quiet observation over a very late dinner, that the true character of a place revealed itself in the hours when it believed no one important was watching. Min-jae had never forgotten it. Naomi Wells had 17 rejection emails, saved in a folder she hadn't opened in 4 years. She kept them not out of bitterness, Alec, out of documentation. The world had been very specific about what it believed she was worth, and she had found it useful, professionally and otherwise, to have the record. She had applied to 23 financial positions in the 15 months after Amara was born. 17 said no. 4 did not respond at all. 2 brought her to final rounds and then went silent in the specific way that meant a decision had been made that no one wanted to explain out loud. Min-jae Kwon had called her on a Thursday morning in September 2017. She arrived at the KZ Ventures office 12 minutes early. His assistant told her he was running 20 minutes behind. Naomi sat in the lobby, took out the small leather notebook she carried everywhere, and began writing. She wasn't writing anything specific. She just needed something in her hands, something that made her look like a person who belonged in the room she was sitting in case anyone looked over and needed to be convinced. Min-jae had walked in, seen her at the far end of the lobby with a pen moving across a page, and made his decision before the interview was halfway finished. He told her this 6 months later, over a working lunch that ran 3 hours past its scheduled end. She hadn't known what to do with the information. 7 years on, she still wasn't entirely sure. CFO of a $2.3 billion hospitality group, $4.7 million saved in vendor renegotiations in the last fiscal year alone, and she still carried the small leather notebook everywhere, because some habits are not about who you are now. They are about every room that tried to tell you that you weren't enough, and the quiet decision you made to keep showing up anyway. Amara Wells was 7 years old and had her mother's gift for reading a room and her own particular talent for saying clearly what adults had already silently agreed not to mention. She had been asleep since somewhere over Lake Michigan, Penny. The stuffed giraffe she had carried since she was 2, worn soft at the neck from years of being held the same way, was tucked under her chin. One small hand hung loosely at her side. As Min-jae pushed the luggage cart through the revolving doors, Amara's fingers drifted down and brushed the cart's metal handle. She didn't wake. She didn't hold on. Just that small and conscious contact, a child's hand, resting against something her uncle had paid for in a building her uncle owned, while the people inside it prepared to tell him he didn't belong here. She didn't know any of that. She knew that he always held the good window seat on planes without being asked, that he ordered extra food before anyone finished the menu because hungry people didn't think clearly. Pang. That when she had broken watch 2 Christmases ago, the one with the small engraving she couldn't read, he had told her it was already broken. She had believed him until she was old enough not to. These were the things she knew about Uncle Min. They were, in the end, the only things that mattered. The lobby of the Harlow Grand was exactly as Min-jae remembered it. Warm light across Carrara marble, the sound of jazz drifting from the Ember Bar, something slow and unhurried that didn't fit the hour. The long front desk of dark mahogany, staffed at 11:51 p.m. by a single clerk in a pressed navy uniform, bade. Min-jae crossed the floor slowly. He looked up at the chandelier as he passed beneath it, for exactly 1 second, the way you look at something that holds more weight than its function. Then he looked at the clerk. The clerk looked back, and something shifted in the young man's expression. Not dramatically, not rudely, just a quiet calculation, the kind that takes less than a second and announces itself only in what happens next, what no one standing in that lobby could have known. Not the couple at the Ember Bar, not the young woman at the concierge desk, whose hands had gone still above her keyboard. Was that the man walking across the marble floor had chosen every tile beneath their feet, and that his father had once cleaned floors like these in a building that no longer existed, on the exact piece of ground where all of them were now standing. The clerk's name tag read Connor. He was 26 years old, well-groomed in the specific way that suggested he took his appearance seriously. And he had been at this desk for 11 months. He was good at his job, genuinely good. He remembered faces. He anticipated requests before they were finished. He moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned that in hospitality, the best service was the kind that felt effortless to the person receiving it. He was also very good, without ever having been taught to be, without ever acknowledging to himself that he was, at reading a lobby, at cataloging people the moment they came through the door, at knowing, before a word was spoken, which category they fell into. Min-jae Kwan, leather jacket, visibly worn at the left elbow. Dark jeans, plain sneakers with no visible branding from this distance. No watch, no luggage that announced anything, pushing a standard cart. The woman beside him, natural hair, a gray cardigan that was good quality but not new, a child asleep on her shoulder, a stuffed animal dangling from the child's hand. The calculation took less than a second. Connor straightened slightly. Not because he was about to be rude. He was not going to be rude. He was going to be helpful. He was going to explain the situation clearly and direct them somewhere more suitable, which was, as far as he was concerned, simply good service. He looked up from his screen with a practiced, neutral smile. Good evening. A pause just long enough. Then, smoothly and without heat, in a voice pitched with the careful precision of someone who had delivered this particular message many times before, "We're fully booked tonight, sir, but there are a couple of properties nearby that might be more your speed." More your speed. 4 words. Not shouted. Not aggressive. Said the way people say things they have convinced themselves are a kindness, which is, in its own way, the most particular kind of harm. Naomi Wells heard those words land. She had been standing slightly behind Min-jae. Amara's weight settled against her shoulder, one hand steady beneath the child's back. Hand. She felt the exact quality of the silence that followed Connor's sentence, the shape of it, the specific temperature. She had felt it in 17 different offices over 15 months. She recognized it the way you recognize a smell from a house you used to live in. You don't have to think about it, you just know. She did not raise her voice. She shifted Amara carefully into Min-jae's arms. The child stirred, murmured something that sounded like Penny, and went still again against his jacket. Naomi reached into her bag, took out the small leather notebook, placed it on the mahogany counter with a soft, deliberate sound, uncapped her pen. She looked at Connor. "I'll need your full name and your employee ID number." Her voice was level, unhurried, entirely professional, for the incident report. Connor's expression shifted, not dramatically, just the small recalibration of someone who has received a response they weren't prepared for. "I'm sorry?" "Your name," Naomi said, "and your employee ID, whenever you're ready." She waited with her pen above the page. Connor did not fully understand what was happening. What he understood was that the woman across this counter was not confused, was not escalating in the way he had anticipated, and was looking at him with the specific patience of someone who had done this before and knew exactly what came next. He said his name. She wrote it down. She also wrote the time, 11:53 p.m., the date, the property name. She wrote the words "fully booked" in quotation marks because she had learned a long time ago that precision in a record speaks louder than anything she could say in a room that had already decided not to hear her. The notebook was not theater. It was not a performance. It was something she had started carrying 7 years ago because she had needed something in her hands that told the truth even when no one around her was willing to. Tonight, like every night she had used it, She was simply making sure the truth had somewhere to live. 4 minutes and 12 seconds later, the front door opened. Two men came in from the street, blazers, no ties. The easy, unhurried movement of people who had never once arrived somewhere and wondered whether there would be space for them. Connor's posture changed, not dramatically. A degree or two, shoulders lifting, face opening up, something in him visibly settling back into comfortable ground. "Good evening, gentlemen. Do you have a reservation with us tonight?" They did not. They were, in every technical sense, walk-ins, exactly as Min-jae and Naomi were. Within 4 minutes and 8 seconds, Min-jae did not check a watch, but he had spent enough years in enough rooms to track time without one. Connor had confirmed availability, run a card, and handed over 2 key cards for a deluxe room on the 31st floor. He thanked them warmly. He smiled the full version of it. He watched them move toward the elevator, with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had just done their job well. Min-jae watched every second of it. He did not shift his expression, did not adjust his posture, did not give Connor anything to read or push against. He simply watched with the still, cataloging attention of a man who had understood very early that the most important information is almost never the information people tend to offer. Beside him, Naomi wrote 2 more lines without looking up. 11:57 p.m. Deluxe room, 31st floor. 2 walk-in guests. No reservation required. At the concierge desk 8 feet away, Elena Torres had stopped typing. She was 33 years old and had worked at the Harlow Grand for 4 years and 7 months. She was genuinely good at this job, the kind of good that guests remembered and managers forgot to document. She read needs before they were voiced. She restored small dignities without announcing she had done it. She had quietly fixed things that should never have been broken, because fixing them quietly was the only option available to her. She had watched what happened at the front desk tonight, with both hands flat on the surface in front of her. She knew what it was. She also knew the weight of the structure she worked inside, who held authority, who could speak, who would be asked to explain themselves if they stepped beyond what their position permitted. She was not a manager. The distance between what she knew was right and what she was permitted to do had never felt longer than it did right now at 11:58 p.m. With her hands perfectly still and her eyes fixed on a point on the desk in front of her. She did not speak. Min-jae placed Amara back into Naomi's arms. He turned to Connor. His voice carried no additional weight, no edge, no signal of what was beneath it, just a sentence. Clean and direct. "I'd like to speak with your manager on duty, please." Connor picked up the desk phone, made a short call. 3 words, too low to carry. Min-jae turned and looked around the lobby. At the couple at the Ember Bar who had grown quieter in the last several minutes. At Elena, hands still flat on the concierge counter. At the chandelier above them, steady and indifferent, $127,000 worth of light falling across a floor his father had once cleaned in a building that no longer existed, on the exact ground where all of them were now standing. He looked at Amara, asleep against Naomi's shoulder. Then he looked back at the hallway behind the front desk and waited. The manager heading toward them had already made up her mind. She'd been briefed in 11 words and thought that was everything she needed to know. It wasn't close to enough. Alec. Vivian Cross had been the night manager at the Harlow Grand for 3 years and 4 months, and she had developed, over that time, a particular philosophy about authority. That it was something you wore, not something you explained. She came around the corner from the back corridor in a black suit that was slightly too formal for midnight. Her posture said she had never once been uncertain about where she stood in a room. Connor had reached her in 11 words. Ta-tat. She had formed her conclusion in approximately the same amount of time it had taken him to deliver them. By the time she took her position beside him at the mahogany counter, 2 of them, on one side, Min-jae and Naomi, and the sleeping child on the other, the decision was already made. She was not here to listen. She was here to close. Good evening. Her voice was measured and pleasant in the specific way that contained nothing pleasant beneath it. I understand there's been some confusion about availability tonight. My staff has fully explained our situation. I'm afraid there's nothing further we're able to do for you. There's no confusion. Min-jae's voice was exactly the same as it had been 5 minutes ago. Unhurried, level, the voice of a man who did not need volume to be heard. I watched your staff confirm a room for 2 walk-in guests while telling us there was no availability. I'm asking you to explain the standard that was applied. Vivian's expression tightened, the small, specific recalibration of a position hardening when it encounters something it has already decided to dismiss. Our staff exercises professional discretion on a case-by-case basis. I stand fully behind that judgment. Min-jae looked at her for a long moment, not with anger, not with anything readable, just the careful, cataloging attention of a man recording what he was seeing. Then I'd like your full name and your exact title. He said it simply. For the record, she provided both without warmth. The way people do when they believe documentation works in their favor. What happened next happened quickly. Vivian said something low to Connor. Connor straightened his spine. Vivian looked toward the far end of the lobby and gave a short nod, the some controlled gesture of someone accustomed to being understood without elaboration. 2 security guards came forward from the edge of the space. Large men, moving with the practiced, unhurried weight of people who had performed this particular maneuver many times. They positioned themselves on either side of Min-jae with the measured precision of a closing bracket. Naomi felt the air in the lobby change. Not shift, change. The couple at the Ember Bar had gone quiet in the particular way. People go quiet when they sense something is wrong, but have not yet decided what it costs them to say so. She did not look at the guards. She looked at Min-jae. He was already looking at Vivian. Completely still. The kind of stillness that does not come from peace, but from years spent in rooms far more dangerous than this one, where stillness was the only available form of control. Vivian folded her hands. Sir, I've extended considerable patience to this situation. This is a private establishment, and I need to ask you at this point too. She stopped. Amara woke up. Not gradually. Not the slow surfacing way adults come back to consciousness. Children wake the way lights come on, all at once, completely, with nothing in between. Her eyes opened. She took in the lobby in a single sweep, the high ceiling, the front desk, the 2 large men standing very close to her uncle. Vivian's folded hands, Connor's jaw, the particular texture of the silence in the room. Then she looked up. The chandelier above them held its light steady and indifferent, the way it did every night. 847 individual pieces of hand-blown glass from the island of Murano, assembled over 4 months by a 71-year-old craftsman who had told Min-jae, over a dinner that ran well past midnight, that light should feel like it has memory. That's pretty, Amara said. Her voice was small and clear in the quiet room, a child noticing something beautiful. Nothing else. But Min-jae looked up. 1 second. The chandelier throwing its light across marble that cost $340 per square foot in a building that stood on the ground where his father used to arrive at 11:30 p.m., with a thermos of barley tea and a keycard that opened a service entrance. He thought about the morning he had stood in this lobby, alone, before the staff arrived, before any of it meant anything to anyone else, and looked up at this light for the first time. That morning, his hands had not been entirely steady. They were steady now. A single dust particle drifted through the beam of light above them. Time did not slow, but something in the room felt, for exactly 1 breath, like it had paused to register itself. The couple at the Ember Bar did not speak. Elena Torres had not moved. Even one of the security guards, the one on Min-jae's left, had shifted his weight almost imperceptibly, the small, involuntary adjustment of a man who has registered something he cannot name but cannot ignore. Nobody in that lobby understood what they had just witnessed. Nobody knew that the 7-year-old girl had just pointed at the most expensive object her uncle had ever chosen personally. Nobody knew about the craftsman in Murano, or the thermos of barley tea, or the service entrance, or the 13 years of overnight shifts on this exact piece of ground. Nobody knew any of it. The chandelier held its light. The dust particle completed its fall, and the moment passed the way all frozen moments pass, quietly, without announcement, leaving behind only a different quality of air. Amara lowered her gaze from the ceiling. She looked at the two guards, looked at Connor's face, looked at her mother's expression, and read it with the particular accuracy of a child who has spent 7 years learning to translate what Naomi Wells was not saying out loud. Then, she turned and looked directly at Vivian. Are you entirely serious? Entirely without accusation. The voice of a child asking a factual question because she genuinely needed the information to understand what was happening around her. Vivian did not answer. She looked at Min-jae instead, which was, in its own way, an answer. Amara considered this, worked her through it with the methodical patience of someone who takes questions seriously and does not move on until she has understood. Then she looked back at Vivian. My mom says the boss of a place always sets the kindness rules. A pause. That's how you know if a place is good or not. No performance, no calculation. A child repeating something her mother had said. In the honest, uncomplicated way, children repeat the things they have quietly absorbed as permanent truth. The lobby received it the way a still room receives an unexpected sound. The couple at the Ember Bar both turned. Fully, no pretense of looking elsewhere. The guard on Min-jae's left had gone still in a way that was different from his professional stillness. Something underneath it had moved. Elena Torres raised her head from the concierge desk, and this time did not look back down. Naomi pulled Amara gently against her side. You're right, baby. Quiet. Absolute. You're completely right. Min-jae held Vivian's gaze for one more moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and took out his phone. Found a number, not searching, directly, and pressed call. Brought the phone to his ear. What followed lasted 23 seconds. He spoke 4 sentences in Korean. Low, without urgency. Then he listened for 11 seconds with no change in his expression. Said a single syllable, ended the call. He placed the phone back into his pocket in the same unhurried way he did everything. Like a man returning something that had finished its purpose. Vivian's voice came back with slightly less smoothness than before. Sir, this has gone on long enough. Min-jae looked at her. I agree, he said. And in the corner of the lobby, Elena Torres felt something she could not yet name. The room looked identical to what it had been 30 seconds ago. The same people. The same positions. The same light from the same chandelier. But something had just changed direction. She could feel it the way you feel weather before it arrives. She didn't know what was coming. She knew she was standing on the wrong side of it. What happened next had been in motion for exactly 23 seconds, the length of a phone call nobody in that lobby understood, made by a man who had never once in his life needed to raise his voice to make a room change direction. Elevator number 3 chimed. It was a small sound, the kind the lobby produced dozens of times every night without anyone marking it. Worse, a single note, unremarkable in isolation. Every person in that room marked this one. The doors opened, and David Park stepped out in a suit jacket that was not fully buttoned. He had the slightly compressed energy of a man who had moved very quickly and was now making a deliberate effort to appear as though he hadn't. He was 48 years old, and he crossed the marble floor with the direct, unhurried purpose of someone who knew exactly where he was going and saw no reason to look at anything else on the way. He walked past Connor. He walked past Vivian Cross. He stopped in front of Min-jae Kwon, looked at him with the expression of a man confronting the full weight of what he had failed to prevent, and said, Mr. Kwon, I'm sorry you were kept waiting. 6 words. Not loud, not performed, just placed into the room the way you place something down when you mean it completely and know that the meaning will do the rest of the work. The lobby went quiet. Not the way rooms go quiet in films, all at once, in a single dramatic drop. The way rooms go quiet in real life, one sound at a time, until the only thing remaining was the jazz from the Ember Bar, which had been playing the same unhurried song for the last 40 minutes, and now seemed, in the new quality of the silence, entirely wrong for the occasion. David turned to face the front desk. He did not gesture. He did not look at Connor or Vivian while he spoke. He looked at the space between them, which somehow made it worse. He placed a tablet on the mahogany counter. Documents on the screen, dense, structured, unmistakable. A deed, ownership filings. The full corporate architecture of KZ Ventures LLC, with a single name appearing across every page in the same position. This is Min-jae Kwon. David's voice was level in the specific way that makes a flat voice carry further than a raised one. He is the sole owner of KZ Ventures LLC, the parent company of KZ Hospitality Group. He owns this hotel. He owns the building you are standing in. He owns the contracts that determine whether every person in this room is employed tomorrow morning, including both of yours. He let that sit for exactly one breath. Then he turned to Vivian. His expression did not change. His voice dropped half a register, the precise sound of someone asking a question they already know the answer to. Did he make a call? Vivian's answer was barely a movement, a single nod. David looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once in return, not with relief, not with satisfaction. The nod of a man confirming that something irreversible is already in motion, and who has moved cleanly past the point of having feelings about it. He did not explain what it meant. He did not need to. The people in that lobby who understood, understood. The people who didn't would spend the rest of the night working it out, which was, in its own way, precisely the point. Amara had been watching David since the elevator doors opened. She watched him cross the floor, watched him say the 6 words, watched the room change around those words the way weather changes. Not all at once, but undeniably. She looked at the tablet on the counter with the focused concentration of a 7-year-old who is trying very hard to understand something that is almost within reach. Then she looked at David, then at Min-jae, then back at the documents on the screen, then quietly, in a voice pitched only for him, "Uncle Min is the boss? Min-jae looked down at her. For the first time since they had walked through those revolving doors, through all of it, Connor's voice, Vivian's folded hands, the guards, the chandelier, all of it. Something in his face let go entirely. Not triumph. Not relief. Something older and quieter than either of those things. He placed his hand on her shoulder, the same shoulder he had steadied on the plane when the turbulence woke her somewhere over Indiana. "Yeah, baby," he said. "Something like that." Connor placed both hands flat on the mahogany counter. The movement was small and nearly silent, but it had the quality of a man setting down something very heavy, setting it down, because he no longer had the strength to hold it, and in the sand, the surface in front of him was the only thing available. His jaw was tight. His eyes held the particular brightness of someone working extremely hard to remain composed in a room that has just completely restructured itself around them. Naomi's notebook was still open on the counter, pen uncapped. She did not close it. Min-jae looked at Vivian cross, not with triumph, not with the expression of a man who has won something, with the expression of a man who has seen what he needed to see and must now decide what it requires of him. "You didn't know who I was." His voice carried across the lobby without effort because everything else had gone so quiet. That is, in fact, the entire point. He looked down at the floor beneath their feet. Carrara marble, white and cool, reflecting the chandelier light from above. My father cleaned floors like these, in a building that used to stand on this exact piece of ground before this one did. He came in through the service entrance at 11:30 every night for 13 years. He went home before sunrise so his son wouldn't see him leave. He never once complained. Not to me, not to anyone. But I watched him carry something home every morning that had nothing to do with how tired his body was, sis. The particular weight that comes from being looked through by people who had already decided, before he entered a room, that he was not worth the effort of a second look. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. I built this building on his ground because I believed it was possible to do things differently, that the person standing on the other side of any counter I own deserves dignity before they have proved a single thing to anyone. Not after you have run your calculation about what they are wearing or where they might belong. Before. He looked directly at Vivian. What happened in this lobby tonight was not a policy failure. It was a decision. You made it in front of a 7-year-old girl who already understood the correct answer better than either of you did. Vivian opened her mouth. She made no sound. He looked at David. One nod. Vivian Cross received her formal termination at 12:31 is at 1 a.m. The timestamp printed in the upper right corner of the document, because Min-jae had learned from his father that the truth was always more credible when it had somewhere specific to stand. She straightened her jacket once before she turned toward the back corridor. The small, automatic gesture of someone preserving the last intact piece of their dignity. Min-jae watched her go the way you watch something that has taught you something, even when the lesson was not the one either of you intended. Connor was next. Min-jae took a single sheet of paper from the notepad beside the monitor and a pen and placed them on the counter. He waited until Connor looked up. 30 days. One page. His voice was not unkind. It was also not forgiving. Not what you did wrong by policy. What you did wrong as a person and what it felt like to be on the receiving end of it. If you can write that page honestly, bring it back. Connor looked at the paper. He opened his mouth once and closed it. Then he gave a small, tight nod. The nod of someone who does not yet know if they have it in them to do the thing being asked. Min-jae did not help him fill the silence. That uncertainty, he knew, was the only honest place to start. He walked to the concierge desk. Elena Torres had not moved in the last several minutes, hands still flat on the surface. Eyes carrying the expression of someone waiting to find out whether they are in trouble for something they did not do. Min-jae stopped in front of her and kept his voice low, just for her. You stopped. You knew where the line was, even when the structure of this building made it impossible to cross it. I watched you tonight. What I saw was someone who recognized wrong clearly, even when they couldn't act on it. That is not nothing. Starting tomorrow, you're guest experience director of this property, because I need people in positions where they can actually do something with what they know is right. Elena looked at him for a moment. Something moved through her expression, through several things, before settling into something that lived between resolve and relief. I won't let you down, she said. I know, Min-jae said. He turned to the room. The guests who remained watched openly. No pretense, no phones raised, just people who had witnessed something and knew it. Every person who walks through our doors is treated with respect, not based on what they're wearing, not based on what they look like. Every person, every time, without exception. That is not a standard we aspire to. That is what this place is. He let the room hold it. Then Amara reached up and took his hand. The paperwork for Vivian Cross was finalized at 12:31 a.m. The timestamp was printed in the upper corner of the termination document because Min-jae had learned early that records were only useful when they were precise. David handled the logistics with the efficient, unhurried competence of someone who understood that administrative accuracy was its own form of dignity. For everyone the document would eventually affect. Connor Walsh left the property at 12:44 a.m. with a single sheet of white paper folded in his jacket pocket. Whether he would unfold it tonight or in 3 days, or not at all until the 29th day, that was something only he could decide. Min-jae had given him a question, not an answer. The distinction mattered. Elena Torres received her appointment letter at 9:17 a.m. the following morning in David Park's office on the 38th floor. She read it twice before she looked up. Then she thanked him in a voice that was entirely steady, which was the only sign of how much effort it required. Naomi Wells formally launched the KZ Hospitality Standards Review the following Tuesday. 14 properties, 60-day deadline, guest treatment protocols, hiring frameworks, and managerial accountability structures. All of it, from the ground up. She ran the project the way she ran everything, with a pen, a notebook, and the absolute refusal to accept that the way things had been done was a sufficient reason to continue doing them that way. Suite 3104 was on the 31st floor, northwest corner. Min-jae had chosen the room's interior himself. The furniture, the textiles, the exact temperature of the lighting. He had never once spent a night in it. There had always been another city, another property, another thing that required his presence elsewhere. He told himself this was efficiency. He had known for some time it was something else. Amara was asleep before the elevator doors opened. Ab. Naomi carried her through the suite and laid her down on the far side of the king bed, with Penny tucked carefully under her arm. She straightened the blanket, stood there for a moment in the quiet, then turned and found Min-jae already on the balcony. Chicago in the small hours of the morning looked like a city that had not yet decided what it was going to be tomorrow. But the river below held the lights of the buildings along its banks, shifting slightly with the current. Somewhere to the north, a siren rose and fell and disappeared. They stood there without speaking for a while, the particular silence of two people who have known each other long enough to not require noise. Naomi was the one who broke it. "You didn't have to say all of that." Min-jae looked at the river. "I know," he said. "That's why it mattered." She nodded once, slowly. The nod of someone receiving an answer they had already understood before they asked the question, but needed to hear spoken out loud anyway. Inside the suite, Amara slept with Penny and did not stir. In the lobby 31 floors below them, the chandelier held its light steady across empty marble. The Ember Bar had closed. The jazz had stopped. The room that had held so much weight a few hours earlier was now simply a lobby, waiting, quietly, for whoever would walk through its doors next. 6 months later, on a Wednesday afternoon in September, a family came through the revolving doors of the Harlow Grand. Two parents, travel-worn in the specific way that accumulates after a long flight and a longer customs line. Alec. Two children. A girl of about 9 moving with the decisive energy of someone who knows exactly what she wants, and a boy of perhaps 5 who was dragging an overstuffed backpack along the marble floor, with the absolute conviction of a child who has decided this task belongs to him alone and will accept no assistance. Elena Torres was in the lobby when they arrived, not behind the concierge desk. In the lobby itself, moving through the space the way she had learned to in the 6 months since she had been given the room to actually use what she knew. She saw the family come in, saw the round the way tired people do when they have not yet been helped, and she crossed to them before they reached the desk. She introduced herself. She asked the boy his name, the one with the backpack. He told her. She said it back to him correctly on the first try, which made him stand up slightly straighter. She said something quiet to the parents that made the mother's shoulders come down an inch. Then she led them toward the desk with the particular ease of someone who understands that hospitality is not a set of procedures. It is the decision, made fresh each time, to treat the person in front of you as if their comfort genuinely matters. Which, for Elena Torres, it did. It always had. She simply worked somewhere now where that was allowed to mean something. Min-jae stood in the far corner of the lobby and watched. He had arrived 40 minutes earlier without announcing himself. Old habit, and one he no longer had any intention of breaking. He was wearing a jacket instead of a leather coat because September in Chicago had not yet decided how serious it was about being autumn. In the elevator on the way down from the parking level, Amara had taken his hand without explanation, which she did sometimes when she was thinking about something she hadn't formed into words yet. She was still holding it now. They had been standing in the corner for 11 minutes. He had not announced himself to the floor. He was not here to check on anything specific, or to audit the month's numbers, or to resolve any particular matter. He had simply wanted to see this, the ordinary version of what this place was becoming, the everyday iteration of the thing he had spent so much of his life trying to build. Amara watched Elena lead the family toward the front desk, watched the 9-year-old girl say something to Elena that made Elena laugh. Watched the boy with the backpack, finally, allow a bellhop to take it from him with the expression of a child making a significant personal concession. Then Amara looked up, past Min-jae's face, past the top of the front desk, past everything, until her eyes found the chandelier above the center of the lobby, the same one she had noticed 6 months ago, in the middle of a room that had briefly held its breath. The same $127,000 of hand-blown glass from a 71-year-old craftsman on an island in Italy. The same light, falling across the same marble on the same ground where Kwon Sung-jin had pushed a mop bucket through a service list entrance at 11:30 p.m. for 13 years. Amara looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at Elena. "She looks at people like they matter," she said. A pause. Her hand tightened slightly in Min-jae's, like Mama does. Min-jae did not answer immediately. He looked at Elena immediately. He looked at Elena guiding the family relaxing, at the mother, Findler's face exhaling, at the boy with the backpack, who was now asking Elena a question, with his whole body leaning forward. He looked at all of it for a long moment. Then he said, "Yeah, sh- she does." Amara nodded once, the specific nod of a 7-year-old who has arrived at a conclusion she finds satisfactory, and tucked Penny more firmly under her free arm. And then she did something she had not done in this lobby before. She reached up. Not loosely, not half asleep, not the unconscious drift of a child's fingers brushing a luggage cart in the dark. She reached up deliberately and took Min-jae's hand. Both hands now. His holding hers holding back. 6 months ago, she had been asleep when she touched him here. She had not known where she was, or who was carrying her, or what the building around her meant. She knew now. Not everything. She was 7. But enough. Enough to understand that Uncle Min had built this place for a reason she couldn't fully name yet, but could feel in the way he stood in this corner. Not like a man, surveying something he owned, but like a man watching something become what he had always hoped it could be. They stood together in the lobby, on the ground his father had once cleaned before sunrise. The chandelier held its light above them. Elena's voice carried softly across the marble as she said something that made both children laugh. Min-jae held his goddaughter's hand and did not move, and did not speak, and did not need to do either of those things. Some things do not need to be said out loud to be completely true. There is a version of dignity that announces itself, that demands to be recognized, that requires the room to stop music before it will agree to exist. And then there is the other kind. The kind that was there before anyone looked. The kind that does not need your confirmation to be real. The kind that a 7-year-old girl already understood. In a lobby full of people who were still working it out. Every person who walks through a door deserves to be treated as if they matter before they prove anything, before you check their clothes or calculate their worth, before you decide whether the room you are standing in is the right room for them, not because of what they own, not because of what they might reveal themselves to be, just because they walk through the door. That is not a policy. That is just what's right. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever stood in a room and felt someone look through you before you said a word, we want to hear about it. Drop a comment below. Tell us what you felt watching this unfold tonight. Tell us about a moment in your own life when someone saw you clearly when they didn't have to. or when they didn't, and what that cost. These are the stories that matter. Not because they're dramatic, but because they're true to something most of us have felt and very few people talk about. If you're watching this and you haven't subscribed yet, do it now and hit the bell. We tell stories like this one every week. Stories about dignity, about the quiet ways people carry each other, about what it means to build something worth standing inside. Like this video if it moved you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And leave us a comment with your city and what time it is where you are, because this channel reaches people in places we never expected. And we genuinely love knowing you're here. We'll see you in the next one.